Good evening and welcome to Sport for a New Generation, this ESRC Festival of Social Science event. Thank you very much for joining us, both in person here at the University of Birmingham and online. I'll do my best to move my eye contact to you here in the audience and to those of you watching wherever you are and whatever time it is via the cameras. My name is Aidan Thompson. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives in a research centre called the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues, which is based here at the university. I'll introduce myself in a little bit more detail shortly, just to run through an introduction to the event and then to talk about the format of this evening. We are here with you for 90 minutes, a good amount of time for a sporting event, and we will have a half-time interval after 45 minutes so we can have some question and answer to break up the presentations. The title, Sport for a New Generation, and our speaker bios suggest a wide range of topics that will come up this evening, which hopefully sets us up for a diverse and engaging discussion. I would encourage anybody here, both in person and online, to engage with that discussion. If you're watching online, please do send through your questions and they can be answered by the panel. Sport in public life is inescapable. You don't need to be an ardent fan of any particular team or any particular individual to value sport, nor do you need to be an elite professional to participate in sport. Sport is in the public eye. It is very rarely off the front and back pages of both newspapers and mainstream media websites such as BBC, Sky, etc. We only have to look back to this summer and the positive stories about England's run, ill-fated sadly, run to the final of Euro 2020 and the Olympics and Paralympics, which finally took place in Japan, having been postponed for a year, through to some of the more negative stories, such as the racism in cricket story, which is changing by the hour or even by the minute today. Sorry, I'm not totally caught up on events from today. I saw some of the headlines before I came over here. I think it's important to break some of when we talk about sport, we need to break it down into two areas. We talk about sport and participation by doing sport, that is through school, through community, at higher education level, which obviously benefits our physical and mental health, provides us with exercise, and benefits our well-being. It also teaches us skills. That is active participation, and there is sometimes an assumption that the activity is always good, and there may be some opportunities this evening to talk about some of the negative side to active participation, or some assumptions over active participation that we make. Also, sport as consumption, that is either on the terraces of sports grounds, through television, in public life, political life, thinking here maybe about Marcus Rashford as an elite sports star that's involved in some political activity, dividing political opinion, and in civic life, maybe through the charitable giving of a number of elite sports professionals during the last 18 months in the COVID pandemic. That, by contrast to active participation, is maybe seen as more passive. But again, maybe the passivity or the assumed passivity dismisses a number of active elements to consuming sport and what it means to us and how we value it. I'm going to start in a moment with our first presentation and take the chair's privilege to be the first speaker and talk a bit more about the moral value and the ways in which sport can influence our character and the way we live our moral lives. But we're always surrounded by sport with a number of ethical questions. Full disclosure, I'm a Newcastle United fan, so whilst I'm absolutely ecstatic with the position that we're in to finally be rid of our ill-fated owner Mike Ashley and our previous manager Steve Bruce, and looking forward to what the future might bring for us, there are some serious ethical questions around the owners that have taken us over in the last month. That does not mean that every single consumer of sport needs to be the epitome of moral virtue or needs to have a moral compass. We talk today about sport for a new generation. There is no discernible change for me in terms of what this new generation do in terms of sport compared to current and previous generations. But it is fair to say that in the mainstream media, sport is popularised and even polarised far more than it ever has been. Consumption of sport is both ever more accessible but also inaccessible as it exists behind the paywalls that Sky, BT and Amazon hold. Participation has never been more important to combat increased screen time and sedentary working practices, but equally competing with a number of other ever-increasing demands on our daily lives. Some of these points may or may not be addressed by our speakers this evening, and of course we do hope that you engage with us. Very briefly run through the running order for this evening. Myself, Aidan Thompson, I will be speaking very shortly around character and sport. Joan Duda will speak around, I've tried to summarise our speakers into 1 or 2 words, which is maybe very unfair and sets them up a little bit, but Professor Joan Duda will speak about motivation and sport. Hannah Lawton will talk about rehabilitation and the rehabilitative opportunities that happen through sport. Ian Thompson will talk about ethical responsibility in sport. Mashkura Begum will talk about community cohesion in sport. And Tom Gary will talk about representation and equality. If you don't, that is now what you are talking about, so thank you. Each speaker will speak for approximately 10 minutes, and as I say, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers after our first 3 presentations, and then again after our second 3 presentations. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself. It's a very strange moment, but my name is Aidan Thompson, and I work in the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues at the University of Birmingham. Our primary focus in the centre is looking at what we call character. Character and virtues through education, in school, in the community, through charitable work and volunteering, the civic virtues of service, the intellectual virtues and the performance virtues, such as curiosity, such as self-discipline, such as determination, a lot of which are words that ring very familiar through sport. Having said that, we've not really done any particular research that focuses primarily on the character building potential of sport. But I'd like to talk to a few slides today, if you'll let me. I will just stand up to do this. So, I'd like to start by saying sport matters. Most recently, nearly 31 million people tuned in this country alone to watch England lose in the final of Euro 2020. 12.8 million people in Britain watched the 2019 Rugby Union World Cup final. That was a time difference in Japan as well. 23% of the UK population aged 16 and over actively participate in sport. In 2018-19, and some of these figures were slightly skewed over the last season and a half because of the COVID pandemic, but in 2018-19, the average Premier League attendance was 38,500 people. England women set an attendance record of just over 77,500 people at Wembley during a defeat to Germany 2 years ago. And a record 3.5 billion people watched the 2018 World Cup in Russia. We expect that number to possibly be beaten in the Qatar World Cup next year. So sport matters. That is both consumption and participation. Also, for me and the centre that I work in, character matters. We define character as a set of personal traits or dispositions that evoke specific emotions, inform motivation, and guide conduct. So we can think about that as both consumption of sport. Sport evokes emotions in us. I know as a very weary Newcastle United fan, those are usually negative emotions, but often positive emotions. I've never been more proud to support England than in this summer's European Championships. They inform our motivation and guide our conduct. That is both on the field of play, or whatever supporting activity that we might do, but also off it. I'd like to just quote Aristotle, because every presentation that I think anyone from the Jubilee Centre has done has referenced Aristotle at some point in the last 10 years. But it's a really important one to say that when we do research around character, our examination is not to know what virtue is, but actually to become good. We are very interested in the practice of character and virtue and how we are good citizens and good people. And in this instance tonight, what sport can do in terms of being a good person. Some questions then to consider, and they might be questions that I pose of my fellow panellists, but also to you at home and you in the audience this evening. Can sport develop character? There is often an assumption that it can. So if it can, how does it do it? Is there a particular type of character that sport does develop? We talk a lot in sport about performance, and I'll touch a little bit on some of what I mean by performance in terms of character in a moment. And is the performance of character in a sporting context very different to how it might be in an educational or civic Does sport have a responsibility to develop good character and good people? Quite often, elite sporting professionals and athletes, they are put up as paragons, they are role models. But are they role models just because they are the world's best, the world's fastest, the world's biggest and whatever? Or are they because they are good people? Do they need to be good people to be a good sporting professional? And is it important to differentiate between participation and consumption when we talk about character in sports? As I said, there are different types of character, and in the Jubilee Centre we call them the building blocks of character. And these four start with the intellectual virtues, such as curiosity, that require us to discern and to think about a particular ethical situation or an ethical activity. The moral virtues, such as honesty, integrity and courage, things that might come up as we do talk about sport, and particularly the performance of sport. The civic virtues, such as service, neighbourliness, citizenship, thinking beyond the sport, beyond ourselves and thinking to other people, both who might be participating with us or consuming sport with us, but also the people that sport affects that we cannot see. And the performance virtues, such as determination, such as resilience, such as even bounce-back ability, which is a very footballing term, that maybe in and of themselves are not particularly useful, but when they are applied through a civic, a moral or an intellectual lens, then we can see them as enablers to building good character. The idea then is that there is an intricative virtue that in the Jubilee Centre we call practical wisdom, which helps guide us in order to flourish both as individuals and as a society, because if we have flourishing individuals, the idea is that we're all giving back to society. So a question there around how does sport help facilitate or enable us to flourish both as individuals and as a society. In putting this presentation together, I went onto the Sky Sports website and just put into the search engine the term character to see what came up. There were 77,000 references to character in the Sky Sports archive, news archive. And just a couple of selections of some of the headlines that came up that involve either the word character or some of the virtue terms that I've mentioned. Resilience is key to success in sport. It's quite generic. Again, we lacked resilience. So sport seen as poor performance, losing, not doing as well, coming second because we lacked resilience. Character is as important as talent. That's Eddie Jones, the England rugby manager, England rugby head coach. But actually, for him and other managers and other coaches have said this over the years. I remember Bobby Robson saying it when he was England manager, that it's important to be a good person as well as a good footballer. Prince Harry, rugby is character building. Well, what does that mean? What is character building on the rugby field? Gareth Southgate praising Raheem Sterling's resilience. Joe Root talking about Ben Stokes showing courage as well as skill and belief, so separating out a particular virtue of courage. Daniel Farke, former Norwich manager, we showed great character. Kyle Walker had courage to change positions and be an emergency goalkeeper with Pep Guardiola. Talking about integrity and responsibility. Grit. Personally think it's a terrible word, but it's a very popular word in educational circles. Determination, respect, character and determination. Humility, motivation, confidence. There are more of these than I remember putting on. Discipline, focus, leadership, and an individual's character rubbing off on a team. So the language of character is very prevalent in sport. It's very prevalent in the reporting of sport. But actually, how vacuous or how meaningful is this language? And how important is that to us, both as participants in sport and consumers of it? Broken this down into three particular areas. We're at the University of Birmingham, so it's important to talk about education. Character and sport in schooling. So that comes through our PE lessons, our games lessons, our activity, encouraging children to participate, to learn the skills of particular sport, but also how it builds character. In higher education, it's important, coming from a research centre, to talk about the research, to enhance our understanding of the world around us and the role that sport plays in that, not just in terms of character building, but actually the importance of sport. in public life. Sport as an activity, but sport as consumption, as I've said, and the morals of sport alongside and also distinct from the business of sport, the politics of sport, and the community of sport. Talking about sport in the community, so then we're not just limiting this to the classroom or to the school, but thinking about coaches, grassroots sport, even sports activism. For example then, in terms of sports activism, the England Euro 2020 squad had three current members of the England squad that have MBEs for non-footballing reasons. This is not for services to football, but for services to the community. That's Raheem Sterling, Jordan Henderson and Marcus Rashford. That's never happened before. And it's not really something that the press have particularly picked up on, unless it's to offer slights or question whether people deserve those accolades. Jubilee Centre, we haven't done any explicit and discrete research on character and sport, but two particular findings that I would just draw attention to for this evening. There's a study from 2015 which looked at character education in schools across the UK, and that was all schools, all age groups, primary and secondary, looking to understand what schools did or didn't do in terms of character and how explicit was it in there. One of the questions that we asked young people was whether they participated in sport. That was one of the demographic questions in terms of extracurricular activities. We didn't drill down into whether that was individual sport or team sport or the level to which they played, but if they participated in sport through school. The premise of the research was in part to understand young people's ability to reason through dilemmas. So we posed particular moral dilemmas, one of which was a sporting one, asked them to whether they would choose a particular course of action, option A or option B, and then the reasons why they would pursue that particular course of action. And what we found was that those that claimed that they did participate in sport performed no better at these moral dilemmas to any other particular extracurricular activity. In fact, it was those that said that they participated in choir and drama that were better at responding to ethical dilemmas more than any other extracurricular activity. Another piece of research from 2017 which worked with marginalised young people, those on the margins of mainstream education or those formerly outside and in some sort of alternative provision. When we asked the question, where do your ideas come from about what it is to live a good life, we asked people to rank a number of different factors. And they ranked sport as the most influential factor after their immediate family, their immediate friends, and their schools and their teachers. So that mean score of 58 out of 100 is only about just over halfway, but actually compared to other factors, it was quite strong after those immediate close family and friend networks. Indeed, they marked it as particularly positive. It was a positive influence on their lives, more so than some of their friends, and also more so than teachers or youth workers. So that again indicated to us, drawing those two studies together, there's a bit of a conflict there, that on the one hand, those young people that are participating in sport are no better to morally reason their way through dilemmas in life, but actually they are indicating that sport is an influential factor to them. So I'll leave it then, just hand over to our second speaker, but just to go back to those questions, to leave those with you, of whether sport can develop character or not. Personally, I believe that it can. I went to a school where we played rugby, and I believe that it was both not just the playing of rugby, but I believe the playing of rugby did influence my character in a positive way. But that might be the extent to which the quality of the coaching, the individuals that I played with, and a whole number of other variables. But I would say that sport does have a positive influence on character development. What type of character is another question, that it certainly has a link to the performance virtues, those of resilience, those of determination and self-discipline, for example. But how does playing sport or consuming sport have a connection with some of the moral, intellectual and civic virtues? Maybe pose this later on, and does sport or do elite sports stars have a responsibility to develop and show good character? Do all role models have that responsibility placed on them when they are elevated to that position? And is it important to differentiate between participation and consumption when we are talking about sport and character development? Thank you very much. I will sit down and very quickly introduce our second speaker. Professor Joan Duda is Professor of Sport and Exercise Psychology in the School of Sport, Exercise and Rehabilitation Sciences here at the University of Birmingham. Joan is internationally known for her expertise on motivational processes and determinants of adherence and optimal functioning in sport, exercise and dance. She is an experienced mental skills consultant working with athletes, coaches, instructors and other performers at all levels. Professor Joan Duda.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you very much, Aidan. Very lovely to be here and to be sharing this table, this lovely group of panelists today. So this question about sport for a new, or maybe we'll even think the next generation, what I'm going to try to add to the mix are these questions about if we want to optimize where sport may go, what sport can bring us, we need to look at the why and the how of how to make these experiences more empowering, and empowering sport and empowered individuals who are participating in sport. So I approach these questions as someone who studies motivation. I sometimes call myself a motivation psychologist. So I'm interested in differences in motivational processes and how they may lead to these differential outcomes. And also the quality of engagement and whether engagement in sport, for example, is sustained. I'm very much a social psychologist, so I look at the social environment in terms of these type of questions, I pull from theory, try to pull theories together and integrate them. And I'm very much an advocate for evidence-based practice. Now, I do my work in a lot of different contexts, but sport is always one central context, whether it's from youth community sport all the way up to elite level. I do work in educational settings, and as Aidan said, in performing arts such as dance. But let's talk about sport. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on, I'll say, youth sport. That's where my heart is. And because I think youth sport can play such an important role just in terms of society, how many kids participate, but also even if you're interested in elite performance sport, you've got to get it right when you're young to build a very sound system. So the power, the potential, the promise, lots of P's, of sport. So we look, and I think Aidan was very much trying to get this point across, right? We look to it as a context that can do good things, that it can bring something to people's lives. It can enhance their well-being, their physical and mental health, their psychosocial development, their character. So we think people participate in sport, it enhances their life skills, their resilience, their teamwork, their self-esteem, and their confidence. Sports don't build character, they reveal it. We think sport can have a role in developing moral character, particularly in this case, we're talking young people. We look at sport for a much broader implication for society, bringing people together, breaking down walls between people, mutual respect. But that's one view about sport. So what is the issue? And I think the bottom line, and I'm speaking to you as someone who's been a consultant for more than 30 years in sport at all levels, and also someone who does research in this area. Sport is not, the engagement in sport is not always a pretty picture. Anyone who studies sport, anyone who works with people involved in sport, you have other type of attributes. You have perfectionism, you have anxiety, you have burnout, you have low self-worth, contingent self-worth, poor body image, depression, compromised mental health. I'm so glad that this is finally getting the attention that it deserves in terms of looking at the sport community. We think sport should build or help to advocate or promote health, but sometimes sport can actually lead to compromised health, both physically and mentally, whether it's overuse injuries, performance-enhancing drugs, intentional aggression and injury that ensues from that. Yeah, there's a bit of cheating in sport as well, and that is an issue from youth all the way up to our these role models that we're speaking about. And again, I just actually added this picture from today. I think that was in the BBC. The argument that actually sport can promote racism and division between people, a major concern. So my bottom line is that sport does not always lead to positive outcomes. It depends on how sport is delivered, how sport is experienced, and why one engages in sport. Sport participation can have negative effects and contribute to compromise pro-social development, well-being, and so on. So what type of sport do we want for this next generation? And the next question is, what makes it more likely that we're going to see this hopeful picture or this compromised picture? Well, I study motivation, so you knew that was going to be the answer. Motivational processes. And when we talk about motivation, we don't speak to them about how much motivation someone has, but why they're motivated. What is the quality of their motivation? And at the very least, there's different reasons to the answer of why you might participate. Like one of my favorite sports, when I have the time and the body's willing, is tennis. And you could have different reasons why you participate in tennis. You can do it for the quintessential intrinsic interest. You just love whacking that ball and move it around the court and going out and play. Or you could do it because we sit at our desks a lot. We're quite a sedentary group, us academics. It gives us a chance at least to engage in physical activity, which is good for our health. And those are called autonomous or want-to type of reasons for engaging in sport. But you could have other answers to that question, why. You could have more controlling or have to, or what's sometimes called must-station type of reasons, such as I feel pressured to participate in tennis. Maybe my parents are making me do it, or the national governing body, or I play tennis for the extrinsic social recognition trophies and so on. And there is a plentiful body of research which indicates if we can get individuals at any level in any sport to be more autonomously motivated, we're going to see positive outcomes. We're in trouble if this becomes a prevailing motivation. So the question is then, what can influence the quality of motivation? And here I'm just very quickly putting one of the theories that we draw from in our work, which is called self-determination theory, that says that quality, whether more autonomous or more controlled, is a function of when we are participating. Do we have a sense of relatedness? Do we feel respected? Do we feel cared for? Do we feel safe? Do we feel adequate competence? And do we have a sense of autonomy, a voice, a choice, not being a pawn on a chessboard? And in terms of those building blocks of quality motivation, a key factor that comes in is the social environment. The social environment that's created by significant others. So we like to call that environment the motivational climate. The motivational climate that's created by coaches, by parents, by league officials, etc. They create an environment that holds implications for what type of outcomes we see from sport, and importantly, what type of motivational processes. So I've been working in this area for a bit of time, and I pull from different theories, and we've developed this model of what is called more empowering features of the environment in contrast to more disempowering, let's say coaching behaviors, for example. And we know from research that environment is more empowering when it is highly socially supportive, it is caring, the athlete matters to the coach, the athlete feels respected by the coach. When it is autonomy supportive, there's a chance for input, there's a chance to engage in decision making, and when it's task involving, that is, there's still an emphasis on always trying to improve, to push yourself, to get better at things. A disempowering climate has different features. A disempowering climate is very controlling. For the coach, it's my way or the highway, intimidating, you make a mistake, it's punitive, etc., and very what's called ego involving, very social comparative. Doing your best is not enough, you've got to be the best. You've got to be number one. And this would be a disempowering climate. So we've done, as well as others, a lot of research on the implications of empowering and disempowering climates in sport. We do that with validated questionnaires. We can assess athletes' perceptions of how empowering and disempowering his or her coach is. We can do it with observation. We could film and then go back and look at empowering and disempowering features. We also do a lot of qualitative work and do different type of methods. But the bottom line, the research is amazingly consistent. It's consistent across sport, the bottom lines are consistent across competitive level, and it is consistent across country. We're fortunate to have a number of international collaborations. If we can get the environment to be more empowering, and you can follow the athletes over time, they do become more autonomously motivated. And if that happens, we are more likely to see a variety of positive outcomes: vitality, enjoyment, and indicators of pro-social development. However, if the environment reeks of more controlling, disempowering type of features, we see a different picture of sport. We see more ill-being, risk factors like perfectionism and cheating behaviors. Okay, compromised moral functioning. So, what can we do about it? There's always hope. And that's the other space we work in. We try to work with those significant others that create those motivational climates, environments that are so influential, and try to up the ante, to try to improve them, to try to make them more empowering and less disempowering. And so that's the training program we've developed over the years. It's called Empowering Coaching. It's called Empowering Coaching, but we don't just deliver to coaches. It has been delivered to teachers, it's been delivered to parents, and even the athletes themselves. It's important for them to have this information. And it really tries to get at, I always believe you can't memorize how to motivate. You need to understand the processes. You need to be able to self-reflect and understand what you're doing and what may the implications be. Everyone, I think, I'm an optimist, does something that's good. There is good practice everywhere. Start to recognize what that is and understand why that's the case and how you can even improve that practice more. And be able to self-reflect on practices that you do as a coach, as a teacher, as a parent, as a friend, that may actually be compromising the people you work with or interact with. So these are some of the features. It's quite interactive and so on. We have classroom-based and practical sessions. And just to say about evidence, when we've developed this over the years, we've taken it out and we've tried to test it. So we've done field experiments out there in the real world, whether it's working with doorstep sport, and our colleagues there from Street Games were our collaborators. So we went and we worked with the leaders who run those programs in disadvantaged communities, or the European Papa Project, which involved 5 different European countries, pre and post-Brexit, in terms of who was involved, and worked with coaches who were coaching young people in football. And we've also worked in terms of sport academies with young people in tennis, football, etc. So over the course of X amount of years, we've been able to do this work in not just here in the UK, but a number of other countries. And again, the consistency of findings and motivational challenges is just quite amazing. So, we just finished up in Glasgow, COP26, climate change. Some of us may have been a bit disappointed by the outcomes there. We were hoping for more. But I would say, if you want optimal sport for a new generation, for our next generation, we need positive and sustained climate change, like we do out there in our real world in terms of the physical environment. And the way to do that is to try to ensure more empowering environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Moving straight on to our third speaker, Hannah Lawton, who is the Sports Recovery Manager at Help for Heroes. Hannah is passionate about the role sport plays in the recovery journeys of many of our wounded veterans. Before joining Help for Heroes in March 2019, Hannah worked for GB Rowing Team's Paralympic programme and coached Team UK's indoor rowing for the Invictus Games. Hannah.
Thank you. So some of you may not know what Help for Heroes is. So Help for Heroes looks after our wounded veteran communities in the UK to help support them through varying different programmes. One of those programmes is sport. And as part of that sport piece, there is the Invictus Games, and that's also a programme that we help run in a partnership with 2 other organisations. And for that, I'm the chef de mission, so team manager in effect for Team UK going out to the Invictus Games. So if we look about the power of sport, what Joan just said, it kind of really hit home actually, because what we try to do within our sports recovery programmes at Help for Heroes is to create those empowering environments. It's about creating safe spaces for that veteran community and their families to feel like they're in a place where they have a sense of belonging, to be back around like-minded people who all are striving for the same thing or equal things in terms of their recovery piece. And we all know that through the power of sport, there is physical benefits to that, and there is also psychological benefits in terms of your mental health and well-being. But what we want to concentrate on is that social well-being as well in terms of that veteran community, because when we have veterans that leave the military, they ultimately are medically discharged, and there is no real support that is kind of put around them to support them kind of exiting that military situation. So they lose their family, they lose their friends, they lose that community that they've been an integral part of for many years, that they've fought on at the front line with, that they've done all of their training with, that they've seen their ups and downs, the positives, negatives of their lives day in, day out. And we know that sport will inspire people, so we know for a fact that within that veteran community, they will look up to athletes that they see on the TV that are competing. We also know that because peer-to-peer support is so valuable to that veteran community, that they're inspired by others that they see in other programs as well. We know that it brings them together in terms of that uniting that community of veterans, but also uniting the communities that they live in. So where I live, if I was to join a local sports club, they will unite that community and bring them together and share best practice. It's about empowerment as well, and Joan, you spoke about this as well. It's about empowering those individuals to be able to take part in something that they A, enjoy, and B, that they can get something from and learn a new skill set, empower them in that community to enable them to recover. It's about confidence. We pick up a lot of veterans who aren't confident. They will struggle to walk through the door. In fact, many programs where you will see them kind of stood outside where they're in tears, because actually walking into an environment when they've been sat on their sofa for the past 12 months and have struggled to leave their home is a really daunting experience. So a lot of our programs are starting to build that confidence, to start engaging them in different levels of environmental challenge. So going from one-to-one support through to those bigger environments where they might have 20 people at a session, they might have 30 people, they might have 300 and something people. It's about connection. Like they lose that connection when they leave the military, and sometimes they don't feel like they can talk to their families, they don't feel like they can talk to their friends. So it's about bringing them back into that community where they feel connected with someone that has that understanding of what they've been through. And equally, it's about that community. So it is about bringing them back together in that safe space and allowing them to strive. But it also brings about a lot of pro-social impact. And again, Joan touched base on some of this stuff, and it's about those volunteering opportunities. And as I said, we're looking at those engagement pieces in terms of an environmental challenge for our veterans. So when we're going from a veteran coming into the service in sports recovery and needing help and support, and then building their confidence, we get to a point where veterans want to give back. They want to give back to not only the veteran community, but they also want to give back to the wider community that they live in, so their local town, village, city. And by doing that, we open up those volunteering opportunities through sessions that we're running, but also working in collaboration with local organisations to offer volunteer opportunities for our veterans. Equally, there's the coaching pathway, and something I'll touch base on a little bit later down the line, but we get a lot of veterans who have been involved in sport through our programmes, and they want to give back, they want to help other veterans on their recovery pathway, and part of that is that they feel that they would like to follow the direction of coaching within a particular sport, or multiple sports in some cases. There's a fundraising element as well for that. A lot of our veterans and their families want to help fundraise, not only for Help for Heroes, but other organisations, local charities that have helped support them, help support families, children who they might also know. And it builds that confidence and that ability to actually raise their hand and say, yeah, I want to help and I want to take part in that. Role models. A lot of our veterans become role models for other veterans because of the things that they go off and do. Recently, we had one veteran who's done some crazy challenges around the UK, and he's raised lots and lots of money for a different military charity. But he's become a role model for many. They've seen that as someone who is a triple amputee, he's gone out and swam, cycled, run on his blades. And there's other people that are able-bodied, are double amputees, that actually feel that now it's something that, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. And leaders as well. We have a lot, the natural leaders, a lot of our veterans because of the environment that they've been in, that they've trained in. So they naturally come into sport and they want to lead. They want to show people how to do things and be the best that they can be. But what about inclusion? Like, one thing Help for Heroes does really well in terms of their sports recovery programs is inclusive programs. But what even does inclusive mean? Well, inclusive is about getting everybody in that environment to work well together and to mix with each other. It's about bringing people from all backgrounds, regardless of their age or their ability, into that one environment and making them feel like they are respected, that they are welcomed, and that they have a sense of belonging when they are there. Now, sport is powerful, and I personally think that it should be accessible to everybody, regardless of whether you have a physical impairment or you don't have a physical impairment, regardless of if you have psychological impairments or not. It should be open to all because the power of sport is so phenomenal that it can change lives in an instant. Now, within Help for Heroes, we run a sports recovery programme. Now, the programme's big, and we have different teams around the country that run regional sport activity. And those regional sport activities are run with the fellowship teams. So we sit under a service area called Sport Activity and Fellowship. The regional teams focus very much on that community development. We follow a community model. It's about engaging with their local communities and offering veteran-specific activities as well. I manage the national programme of sports recovery. So we're looking at programmes that are big, that are inclusive in terms of bringing lots of numbers in, regardless of their age, gender, ability. And we work across 6 pillars within sport, so it is quite a lot. Recreational kind of is what it says on the tin. It's the grassroots piece. It's the bringing veterans in to try taster sessions, to try multiple different training blocks, to do some virtual training, to try different virtual online classes or pre-recorded classes, live events. Then we've got competitive. Within our competitive pillar, we open up opportunities for veterans to compete, because in the world of sport, there are many veterans who don't classify in sport in terms of their physical impairment or their psychological impairment. So our competitive piece, we offer competitive opportunities. We look at external opportunities that we can get people involved in, and we equally have our competitive international events, which are things like the Invictus Games and the Warrior Games. Then we've got our clubs pillar. So our clubs pillar is again about community. It's about bringing them in to share best practice, to talk to each other, feel like they've got a safe space where there's a sense of belonging for those individuals, where they can talk about that one common theme, the sport that they're engaged in. It allows them to share best practice, it allows them to talk about coaching skills, it allows them to talk about training programs, it allows them to talk about competitions that they might be targeting in the next month, 3 years, whatever it might be. Then we've got special events. So our special events pillar focuses on ad hoc, kind of one-off events that aren't necessarily internal run events. So these are events that we target for our veteran community that we know will accept any of them regardless of their age, gender, ability. Then we've got qualifications and awards, which is currently our coaching academy. So our coaching academy was set up last year, and it was kind of built on the fact that through a lot of our programs, our veterans were saying, we want to give back, we want to help other veterans and their families, and we want to help our community. The Coaching Academy was set up as a year-long programme where we help our veterans gain a coaching qualification. They have to do a certain amount of voluntary coaching hours within their local communities. We work with UK Coaching to deliver a wider skill set, so they're not just getting that specific sports qualification. And they start to become a more rounded coach. They start to understand what it feels like to coach in the community to people who aren't veterans and don't understand their background. And then we've got our performance pillar. So our performance pillar is the smallest pillar in terms of it is very much about elite level sport. It's about those individuals who are on talent development podium pathways, who are going through those pathways, who are talent transferring from one pathway to another, or they're exiting their sport. Because what we do know through sport is that when military veterans are leaving the military, when they leave performance sport, it's a very similar situation. They are kind of left to get on with it, and they feel like they've just lost everything again in terms of that community, that family piece. Now, one of our bigger activities and programs that we run is the Invictus Games. The Invictus Games program is the most inclusive sports event that I know of on this planet. And I say inclusive in terms of it allows us to bring everybody together. We've got mums, dads, we've got sisters, brothers, we've got people of all ages, all abilities, different disabilities in terms of triple amputees all the way through to able-bodied. We've got people with PTSD that are all coming together in those training environments to be able to go and compete at one of the most inclusive sports events that exists. I'm going to show you a short video. It's not very long, it's about a minute. Hopefully it all works okay, we'll see. Which will kind of give you a bit of a flavour about what the Invictus Games is and just the power that it has to kind of unite this community together and really have a positive impact.
These men and women are carrying scars, and the sport is there to help them overcome that. It's something that these guys will remember for the rest of their life.
For me, it's not about winning medals, it's about taking part.
That's what's driving me, is just improving every little step of the way.
We couldn't do it without Help for Heroes. We couldn't do it without the people that support the charity.
It's unlocked something in me. I mean, I've known people for decades, and they've said that they've never seen me this happy, this put together.
But Help for Heroes do an amazing, amazing job, and they support in any way they can.
So this isn't about being the best that you can be. This isn't about winning a medal. This is about coming together on your rehabilitation journey, on your recovery journey, to have a lifelong impact on you and your family. One of the biggest issues that we face as an organisation and the wider general public is what we do when we've put people into an environment that is so inclusive, and then they come out and that inclusivity is no longer there in terms of your local sports club, in terms of the competitions that the national governing bodies are running. We end up with a lot of people that are on such a high because it's been such a fantastic event and such a big, momentous occasion in their life. All of a sudden, go, what can I do now? Now that dip is quite normal, and we know that dip is quite normal. Even when you go on holiday, you have a bit of a dip when you come back, and you're coming back to that reality piece and every day-to-day life. So what we're trying to do in that rehabilitation recovery space is actually fill that gap a little bit and offer opportunities so that we still have lots of inclusive opportunities that exist within our programs for veterans, and hopefully longer term opening that out even wider. If I take you back to the summer, hopefully some of you watched the Paralympics over in Tokyo, and what you saw there was sport in action in terms of a disability classification system. Sport is inherently unfair. We're never going to make it fair. There's always going to be people who are taller and shorter. There's always going to be people that are stronger and weaker. And the purpose of disability classification is to create a level playing field. So in terms of inclusivity, there's absolutely the space for training, giving it a go, taster sessions, for everybody to come together and to try those sports out. In terms of competition, that's where these classification pieces get put in place to allow a more level playing field. And that's one thing that I would argue in terms of sport is lacking at the moment, and something that we actually need to do something about. It's about allowing sport to be open for all, and them feeling like they can have a purpose and that they can go on and compete if they want to compete, and that there is a pathway to do that. Sport is all about pathways. There is a pathway in every element of sport. No matter where you end up in that pathway, you're always part of it. So for us, everything that we put on in terms of our bigger programs is about enabling those veterans to have that inclusive space, because without it, they don't feel like they've got a place in their community.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks. We are running slightly off schedule, but not to worry too much if you're go with us for this. I think if we just take a pause there, because there were three quite long presentations. All of us spoke for over 10 minutes, so well done to all three of us. Just to pause there and ask a question if there are any questions from the audience initially. If not, I'd quite like to ask Hannah something that you've just said there. Talking about inclusivity, is there a tension, particularly at elite level, between inclusivity and, as you say, with the Paralympic Games, which were superb this summer in Japan, at elite level, is sport not much more about competition, where we do want to see who is the fastest, who can throw the furthest, who is the best team? So is that the tension between, I guess, grassroots and amateur level and elite performance level, where we go from inclusivity and wanting everyone to participate to actually who's the best?
I think there's a space for competition at whatever level you want to take part in sports, and some people will want to naturally compete because they're competitive, right? I'd want to compete if I was taking part in sport. I think the inclusivity piece absolutely exists in that training environment where we can bring people in together. There is an issue in terms of inclusivity at competitive level, because you're never going, if people want to compete, normally you want to compete because you want to either compete against yourself or you want to compete against others. So it becomes inherently, it becomes more unfair if you're not going to put in place some form of categories that creates that more level playing field. So yes, in terms of in that elite sporting space, people want to compete, they want to do the best, and the only way that they can do the best is if they are up against people of similar impairments, if we're talking Paralympic level. But at that lower level, it's about allowing people to give it a go, and if they want to go into that competitive environment and they want to follow that pathway, then there needs to be opportunities for them to do that. And at the moment, that actually lacks significantly. There's a lot of people that could have a physical or psychological impairment, and they would just be thrown into open categories against you and me.
Thanks, Hannah. I do have a question for Joan, but I don't want to hog all of the time. So move back on to the three presentations and introduce our fourth speaker, Professor Ian Thompson, who is Director of the Lloyds Banking Group, Centre for Responsible Business, again here at the University of Birmingham.
Thank you. I feel a little bit of a fraud here, kind of talking a little bit about business. I'm not actively involved in any of the kind of really interesting stuff that's actually going on there. However, I have been researching sport for quite a long time, and particularly one case study that we've been following a kind of a club for over 10 years now, in terms of through all of the things there, and then following all the kind of the consequences of different things. So what I oops, I broke it already. So what I want to do is to look at, so a lot of the research is on sustainable business. It's about how we can make things sustainable. And one of the things is about this idea of business of sport and contributing to a sustainable world for all generations. So looking at there's been what we refer to as a sustainable or responsible turn in business, where businesses are moving away from, if you like, the conventional profit maximizing type of kind of institution, to something which is all about kind of making worlds, about purpose, making profit from purpose. And actually there's been a long tradition, if you like, of business learning from sports. And in fact, you look at business management, it's full of sporting metaphors, absolutely full of it. You'd think that every chief executive was kind of like an Olympic athlete rather than a pale male stale 17-year-old kind of person sort of like shoveling money into their face, big fat cats and stuff like that. Okay, there's an awful lot of things going on. We often also conflate business with money. Okay, and there's good reasons for that, because you need money and you need resources to make things happen. So a lot of about when we're looking at businesses of sport, it's about how can we get resources in. And there's some kind of classic things here. You've got sports, you've got billionaire playthings, we've got for-profit kind of ownership, people want to make money out of sports, individual sponsorships, charity, public sector. And so there's a whole range of portfolio of different kind of like funding that goes along with business that's really kind of quite important. The problem is, and apologies to the media, but often the media portrayal would assume that every business is like a multinational corporation run by the Saudi kind of wealth fund or something like that. Whereas the reality is not. most sports are not rich. Most clubs they're scrabbling for money, for resources at any time. Most of the resources that flow in are non-financial. They're actually provided often free by the community within which they're embedded. And one of the things that we actually see from looking at businesses is when businesses lose that connection with the kind of the systems that they rely on, that they're dependent upon for these other resources, that's when kind of problems come in. The case I was talking about, I'll come on to that, was one where you had a small club based in Scotland that was taken over by a Lithuanian banker, stroke money launderer, stroke mafia, who's somewhere on the run in Russia, seemingly driving cabs, or in Siberia. It's kind of like, it's like Elvis. Where's Romanov now? And there's all these different things. It has got international arrest warrants on it, so I'm okay that the Lithuanian mafia is not going to come after me. One of the things which came in with this, it created a crisis. Came in, spent lots of money, well, actually laundered lots of money, and there's an awful lot of like Italian football, money laundering, all these sort of things. So there's often irresponsibility there. One of the things that's coming through now is this idea of supporter ownership or supporter inclusion in there. Actually building the people who have a kind of a stake in it and actually building it through. And this is a really interesting kind of like development in this case where rather than go for another billionaire to come as a plaything, they decided let's own and fund and support the kind of the club ourselves. And came in with a mutual supporter ownership thing. A thing called a pledge, where about 8,000 people give money every month for no purpose whatsoever other than to keep the club in existence. Okay? There's no season tickets, there's no badges, there's no nothing, just to kind of protect the club from these other instruments. Other phenomenon in Scotland is that we have community assets where you have a right to buy. So a lot of sporting clubs are now considered community assets, that if they're being sold, the first place you would go is to ask the community whether they actually want to buy it, and it becomes a community asset. There's many, many different ways. It's not just about purchasing, it's about funding. There's lots of different models, and in some ways when we look at the business of sport, it's about being creative and thinking differently. It's not about a rich owner, it's not about lots of money, it's about resources. And the case of Hearts was a classic example of people chasing money, which cost them all of the other support, which led to effectively to their decline. The other thing I want to do is, this is some work, is the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the issues that I think is often missed in sports is we can't really articulate the value and the contribution that it actually makes. It's often seen as a cost or things like that. What we're finding, and this is in business, is actually trying to say, well, where else do they make the difference? And the Sustainable Development Goals are a kind of a UN kind of like phenomenon, if you like, of 2015, taken over everything. And this is a toolkit that if kind of sports are looking at, where you can actually start to articulate the contribution of sport for poverty, hunger, health, education, gender, water, energy, work, decent kind of like economic growth, investment, inequalities, sustainable communities, consumption, climate, life on water, life on land, participation, and kind of like in peace. Doesn't sound much like a lot of sports, but it's there. One of the things that we kind of like do is this idea of trying to map the relationship in terms of a particular club or a particular sport, linking back to the underlying social, economic, and ecological systems in which they are embedded and they contribute to. So one of the things that we want to look at is what are these kind of systems upon which a club depends so that they can protect and regenerate it, so that you can actually manage it. What do you have control over? What systems do you have control over in your sport? And I think we've heard examples where we've actually that control is sometimes kind of a bit problematic, and it's important to get some control, but actually sometimes you've maybe not got that much. And then you want to get respect and do no harm. Then you've got the positive impact, and then you've got the negative impact. And these are really important when you do it, because this bit here is where the value of sports comes from, and that's how you pull in the resources that you actually need for the sport to flourish. And these were the things here that you often rely on other people to do. And so rather than it seen about reducing negative impacts and actually just kind of trying to enforce control, it's actually about working with the people in these other systems and actually maximizing and articulating this. And there's been some really interesting work on this bit here. Once you start to identify it, many football clubs, they have been at the forefront of fighting racism. They've been, certainly in Scotland, there's things like walking football, there's sports things, sports coaching, people recovering from heart attacks, where they're actually recognizing the contribution that they make to society, and then they're using themselves and having multiple sources of value. So this, I think, is really something that's really important. I'll just finish with a couple of examples of where, even when things go really badly wrong, clubs can actually make a kind of a contribution to things that actually go on. So I mentioned Hearts. So Hearts, I've been a Hearts supporter since I was tiny. I still live sort of like 5 minutes walk from the stadium. And one of my first memories is being thrown over the things by my grandfather, who was also a kind of a supporter. I also support rugby as well, and I do judo and other things. This was a club in absolute financial crisis. It was that close to going out of existence. It was relegated. It was just there. They had no money. It was caught up in all sorts of fights. The pledgers, the foundations got together along with their coalition. They got some money together. They got a thing. What was one of the first things that they did? One of the first things that they did was get rid of the shirt sponsor. How stupid is that? It was Wonga, right? Wonga, payday lenders, who basically, most of the supporters were in hock to. They were seen as irresponsible, but they wanted to make a signal. So the first thing they did was they basically said, we're not going to have a shirt sponsor. We're going to be the first UK club to be sponsored by a charity, and we're going to give money to a charity. Insane? Not really. Not when you look at where you get most of your resources from. Okay? Most of the resources come from the community. This was about rebuilding the community. It turned out okay, because there was a couple of people thought, that's really clever, that's not fair that you're losing money. So they then compensated them for actually having this Save the Children. They originally weren't going to have a shirt sponsor because they were actually going to go there in respect of, it was in 2018, there's a famous story about the first team volunteering for the First World War, and they all got wiped out in the Somme. So like there's a big thing there. They were also the first club. The next thing they did was become a living wage employer. They increased the wages. They were the first one to do it. There's only a handful of clubs, football clubs, handful of them are living wage employers, right? Minimum wage. They've got this thing about they think like a supporter. So they become much more open and transparent, even to the extent, like the other thing about being a Hearts supporter is you don't win. Okay, you just got to kind of like get used to centuries of losing an occasional thing. You'll get that, and COVID came along, disrupted the whole thing. They got relegated with a partition thing. That is normally a death knell for a club in financial crisis. But because they'd built all this thing up, there was not a single complaint. There wasn't a sack the board. There wasn't a get rid of this. They were dreadful. They were playing dreadful football, but people stood behind them because they actually did this. And this picture here, I think, this is a really interesting symbolic thing here. As a tribute to the pledgers, they created a strip where, rather than have it there, where they have there's 8,000 names on that strip of anyone who put any money in to pledge to save the club. And it's actions like that, which are business orientated, I would argue. They're about managing. It's about kind of like getting these things, understanding what you actually need to do in there. And they're not alone. The other one I'll just finish with is might have heard of Forest Green Rovers. They dare to be different. You win in different ways, in particular in a business. They're the greenest football club by FIFA. They're the first and only vegan football club, and being certified as carbon neutral for United Nations. And there's an example. And they are now leading in terms of like the climate change commitment of there. Now, I've never been to see them. I don't think they're ever going to win a major trophy, but they are becoming leaders in this field because they're winning differently. And I think that's one of the real kind of like things that can actually happen in sport. I'll stop now. I could go on for this, but I'll pass on to somebody
Thanks,
else.
Ian. Moving on to our fifth speaker this evening, Mashkura Begum is Chair of Trustees at Sati House. Sati House is an anchor organisation that is committed to supporting women to drive positive change in their lives, in their families' lives and local communities. Together, Sati House are on a journey to engage, enable and empower women to improve their knowledge, skills, networks, opportunities and leadership potential. Mashkura. There you are.
Thank you, Ian. So, welcome all. So you've heard from my previous panel members about elite sports, sports within academia, and a really inspiring national charity Help for Heroes. So I just want to spend the next 8 to 10 minutes talking about a local charity. And majority of us, our exposure to sports is actually at a grassroots level, at a neighborhood level. Very few of us engage in elite sports at a national level. So, that's where it really begins for even elite individuals. They start engaging at a local level. So, just want to introduce you to Sati House, which is a charity based in Aston, which is northwest of Birmingham. Aston, for those of you that are not familiar with Birmingham, is in Ladywood district, one of the most deprived wards in the country. However, the organisation has been around for 43 years, and it's been engaging in several activities and so forth. But it's been engaging and doing sports in various forms since it's been in existence. However, one of the most interesting thing is Sati House is adjacent to Aston Villa football ground. And in the last 40 years, it's done very little work with the football club. No surprises there, because some of the service users that actually come to Sati House are women from the local area who have no interest in, or supposedly who have no interest in football. So 4 years ago, the new football foundation manager approached Sati House, and because his background is in community development, he said, it seems remiss of the foundation and the club not to do any work with the charity. So we would like to invite you to some of our activities, and let's build that relationship. And that really started a wonderful journey for Sati House as an organisation, not only with the Villa Games, but just generally how we engage in sports. So I'm just going to show you. So this was few months ago, actually, at the launch of the Commonwealth Games volunteer call out. So this was a really interesting opportunity for the organisation to go to Birmingham City Centre and be at the volunteer launch. Sati House is a very volunteer-led organisation. However, very few of our service users volunteer at sporting events because they haven't got really much connection with it. But as a result of our engagement with Villa, we've had a huge interest in some of our service users, their families, wanting to volunteer for the games. And we are actually one of the bases where volunteers came to sign up, and we're a leading partner of the games. So that was a pivotal moment for the organisation to be at that. Oops, you could see I'm not used to using this. I'm not an academic. So this was one of our very first matches where we attended with a group of us, and I attended that particular match. And what was really interesting was all the ladies, as you could notice, whether they wear the hijabs or scarves, they actually got the claret colour, which is the Villa colours. So, for those of you following. So that is an amazing way of actually just being part of that club, part of that fan experience. And it really builds that cohesion, being part of that community. And would you believe there are people who've lived adjacent to the football ground all their lives have never ever stepped into that football ground, so those are the kind of stories, and it was just missed opportunities. So again, I'm going too fast. Some of the young ladies that attended, their opportunity to meet with the previous coach, Dean Smith. This is going too fast for me. Apologies, I think I've missed one. There was another image that should have been there. Was some of the ladies were actually the flag bearers on the day. So again, you know, a full stadium on Sky Sports, hijabi ladies being flag bearers in a Premier League match. It's actually sending out quite a strong message around social cohesion and empowering. And I want to touch about representation. Representation is really, really important. When we go to events, when we participate, we want to see people like ourselves, you know, but we also want to see people that represent our city, our neighborhood, our country. That is really important, and that often isn't the case. So that's something that through the work that we do at Sathi House, we try to address. Again, a few months ago when we had some glorious weather, this is Aston Park. Sathi House is actually located behind Aston Park, where Aston Hall, a Grade 2 listed building, is situated. We did a family sporting day with Aston Villa, Aston Sports, and a number of other providers. We sort of worked in partnership, and we had the whole community come out on a warm day and just engage in various sporting activities. And it was taster sessions, and it was a huge success. I think being, you know, in lockdown, you know, and you know, being socially isolated, this was a huge opportunity for community members to come together, and sports was an amazing way to actually do that. And again, another project that Sathi House is involved in, we've started during lockdown to take a lot of our service users outdoors on, you know, walking, and as a result of walking, you know, the women that we work with got really interested in also trying other sort of, you know, activities outdoors, and cycling was the next best thing. And Birmingham has got this huge sort of, you know, drive to get more people on bikes, and we capitalized on that. We were given some funding to purchase 12 bikes, and what is really, you know, inspiring, both these both sort of coaches, when they took on the project, they didn't know how to ride a bike. So they were volunteers, and as part of being on the project, they've trained themselves. They learnt about bike safety. So this is again a wonderful, you know, example of actually engaging, participating, and also empowering. This is a really interesting opportunity for us. Aidan, earlier on spoke about the Euros. You know, I was part of that viewership. My whole family was my kids. But it was a really, really uplifting moment for our country. But after the finals, we saw a lot of negative press. And we had a lot of, you know, press, so to speak, come and talk to Sathi House around their views around some of the racism the players faced. And this was an image actually from one of the photo shoots some of our ladies did to actually highlight how we uplifted, how we brought the community together. And in the past, these women never engaged in sports, you know, as sort of audiences, but the games really brought them together. So it was a wonderful moment for us. Yeah, so I think this was in the ITV News, you could sort of see. And finally, I just want to talk about, you know, how sports, how place-based art plays a huge part. So Sathi House is involved in quite a few creative initiatives. Few weeks ago, we did a arts trail in Lausanne, again a very sort of inner city area within Birmingham. And what was fascinating was, you know, the local community were really involved and engaged in the art pieces that we actually worked on. There's 9 in total, so it's arts trail where you could sort of follow the trail. There's QR codes, and you get to understand a bit about each individual mural. So Muhammad Ali, when he came to the UK, went to Birmingham, he came to a certain part, so his mural is, you know, that part of that neighborhood. But what was most striking is this final mural that we did. Whilst the artist was working with the community at a local park, he spotted a mum and her daughter just skating. And this is that young lady in a hijab with a sort of a full gown on, skating in George's Park in Lausanne. You don't often see that. You know. So he politely asked the lady, "Can I sort of use that in my mural?" And they were absolutely delighted. So again, I just want to talk about, go back to that point about representation. It's really important for us to see people who look like us, who look like our neighbours, our community in grassroots sports, within sort of elite sports, at an international level, at a local level. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mashkura. Thanks. Our sixth speaker is Tom Garry, women's football reporter at the Telegraph newspaper. Tom is an alumni of the University of Birmingham, having studied a BSc in environmental geoscience, graduating in 2013. During his time at Birmingham, he was involved with the Guild of Students, media societies such as Burn FM, the student radio, as well as Guild TV. Tom has since studied for a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism at BCU and joined BBC Sport website after that. After a number of years with BBC, Tom moved to the Daily Telegraph in December last year, where he covers women's football and has attended a number of women's elite sport events such as the World Cup, FA Cup finals and EFL playoffs. Tom.
Thanks, Aidan. Thank you, Aidan. Hi, everybody. Yes, as you said, I'm an alumnus, so it's very nice to be invited back. And so many happy memories here. I just realised parking up here that I first met my now wife about 800 yards from where we're currently talking, so it's very nice to be here. But I shouldn't digress. We're here to talk about the second love of my life, which is sport and sports journalism. And so I in summing up, trying to think how I could sum up what I wanted to talk about here today, I felt that over the last sort of 8-9 years in sports journalism, most stories on the pitch and off the pitch could be summed up by heroes and villains. So for that reason, I wanted to start with a superhero. I'm imagining you weren't expecting me to bring up Spider-Man in a sport talk, but there was a reason why I'm mentioning Spider-Man here, and it's not because it's a great film. I think it is a great film, and I hope maybe they could film the next one with the clock tower with him climbing up, perhaps. But no, the reason I'm mentioning Spider-Man is actually quite a cheesy one, if you'll forgive me, but it's because when I was thinking about some of the key themes of sport in 2021 and sports news stories in 2021, I felt it could be summed up by a phrase from the original Spider-Man movie, quite a famous saying, "With great power comes great responsibility," and I felt that could be applied to so many aspects of sports journalism, stories that we're seeing today and in the past, and also that we will see in the future. And a lot of the things that I've come across in my career relate to the responsibility that comes with a powerful position in sport one way or another. So that's whether it's about governing bodies like FIFA and the powerful responsibility they have to a whole world and billions of people who play and are interested in something like football, whether it's the news that's been referred to by other panellists today at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and the duties and the responsibilities that a club has to not only its players but to the wider sport. And also the power and responsibility that the media have, the responsibility to be fair and accurate, and which isn't always achieved. And particularly the responsibility and the power that we're very privileged to have in the team that I work in, which is at the Daily Telegraph, where we have a whole department dedicated to just covering women's sport, which is unique within the UK newspaper industry. And so that gives us, and myself included, a very, very privileged position and a responsibility to use that resource to cover women's sport, and in my case, women's football, as much as we can, and in some cases that means exposing various inequalities, but also it's a real responsibility to report on an area of the sports industry that gets very little coverage compared to men's sport, which dominates the news agenda. And that power, when used responsibly by journalists, can have certainly this year in 2021 we've noticed some very, very powerful impacts. Using an example here by a colleague from the United States, Meg Linehan, who writes for The Athletic website. This story a few weeks ago involved around 6 months investigation from Meg, and the story revealed allegations by multiple players over multiple clubs against a British coach in the American Women's Soccer League called Paul Riley, and he was accused by multiple players of sexual coercion and verbal abuse, and you might see the note at the bottom of the screen there that had been updated by that point to reflect that he had since been fired as a result of the journalism that had come out there, and actually subsequently various other senior figures in American women's football faced significant scrutiny, and the commissioner of the top league in America, Lisa Baird, also stepped down from her role amid criticism of the organisation's handling of previous reports of this alleged abuse. So that, I felt, was an example of how the industry has an opportunity to use that power in a responsible way to enforce change. And since that story, the team that I work for are now looking into other allegations that have since emerged from around the whole world against dozens of coaches, which brings me back to that idea of power, because coaches themselves are in a very powerful position, and in rare cases, sadly, that power we're finding has been misused. Going away from abuse, but on another area where people in our industry have great power is clubs, but also players are finding that they have power to speak out. And so I'm rather self-indulgently using an example of some of my own work here, but earlier this year in April, some players from Birmingham City Women's Football Club, that's one of the top league clubs in England, approached myself and Telegraph colleagues to seek support because they had written to the board of the club with some serious complaints about their working conditions, ranging from all sorts of things from the medical supplies or lack of, to some specific things such as they were getting injury rehabilitation in what they described as a sort of shed cabin, and in general didn't feel as though the environment was as professional as it's supposed to be in a professional women's Super League. And the reason I mention that is off the back of that story, England players and others from around the women's football world then spoke up to voice support for these Birmingham players in an overwhelming way, which we'd never seen engagement of a story of that kind before. And so again, I thought that was an example of the power of when, in this case, players decided to use their voices and to try and enforce change. And we're finding in the industry, certainly in the women's football world that I work in, that players more and more in recent years are realising that the power they can have as a public figure and a public role model to try and enforce change in a positive way. I hope many people recognise this face. This is one of the most famous faces in our sport, Megan Rapinoe, the United States double World Cup winner, who perhaps for non-football fans rose to prominence a couple of years ago before the Women's World Cup, when a US journalist asked her if she would be going to the White House to meet Donald Trump after potentially winning the tournament, to which, and I'll put a beep in, she replied that she wasn't going to the beeping White House. And the clip went quite viral, but more importantly, Megan Rapinoe was, as a white athlete, one of the very, very first athletes in the world to take a knee, in her case during the US national anthem, to highlight and protest against racial inequality in America, which was a very powerful thing to do, and she continues to speak out against various issues. And that sort of use of power from a player we're seeing used in all sorts of different ways. It's already been alluded to by other panellists about the work that Marcus Rashford did, that I'm sure you'll remember, and he's still doing around trying to end child poverty. And I noticed this week that off the back of that, the England and Leeds striker Patrick Bamford said only last week that he felt inspired by Marcus Rashford's work on poverty to speak himself last week during the COP26 conference about climate change, and speak up and use his voice to try and raise more concerns about what was going on to our climate. However, I've talked a bit about players and clubs and coaches and governing bodies, but there is another group of people that we're finding in sport that have more power than perhaps ever before, and that's actually the fans and the public, because a fan now in 2021 has more power to communicate with a player than ever before using social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and TikTok, if everyone recognises the various symbols. That bottom right one always is the least recognisable, I find. But anyway, we're finding, and when I talk to women's footballers, either on record or off record, and ask a question along the lines of what has changed the most in the last few years, overwhelmingly a response will come back mentioning online abuse, which is quite sad and depressing, but it is becoming a common theme of many of the stories that we're seeing in recent years. Just to give a few examples, this was a few years ago actually. I went to the match immediately before this. That's a Birmingham woman, Karen Carney, a legend of Birmingham area, and formerly of England and Chelsea, and she scored the winning goal for Chelsea in a Women's Champions League game that I was at actually, and I thought played very well. But she woke up the following morning to 2 or 3 death threats, one of which is sort of alluded to rather depressingly at the bottom of this screen grab, which was shared by her England manager at the time and became a story the following day. And actually Karen Carney is an example of somebody else who subsequently received quite a lot of online abuse, sexist abuse, and is now actually someone who has removed herself entirely from social media since starting working as a pundit. And I could have used dozens of examples instead of that one. And it is depressing to see that more often than not, some of this abuse is of a racist nature. This was a screen grab taken from the Instagram story of, she was a Manchester United player, she's now a Chelsea player, Lauren James, shared earlier this year. And I don't need to describe the emojis that are being used there, but as she says, boring now. But it's boring now because for black athletes, this is something that is depressingly repetitive, and on social media we're seeing a lot of, and I know the panel have already spoken about what happened after the men's European final this summer, but sadly that racism and the power that fans now have to communicate directly with athletes and others is something that's really changed in recent years. However, all of those things that I've rather quickly rambled on through and tried to kind of talk about in 10 minutes or so, I believe, if you forgive me, coming back to the Spider-Man reference, are all kind of connected in a web, and they all link together in a way which I guess I'd like to say relates back to what Aidan was saying right at the start of the evening about character and perhaps whether we all choose to be the hero or the villain in the story. And as Aidan was saying, really, I think it can all be summed up by, it's about being a good person, really. And that's something hopefully everyone will take forward in sport going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all. Thanks. All of my fellow panellists and the speakers this evening. We are going to run over into some injury time. I hope you'll all bear with us for that. We have spoken with such passion and such insight into our various areas this evening that we've all run over time, so apologies. I brought up so many different aspects, the different, my 5 panellists this evening, and I'm almost kind of having a bit of a moment as to what to ask and who to ask it of. But thank you, first of all, Tom, for bringing us back to, I guess, a little bit of the realities and the negative aspects, because I think all 5 of us before you spoke very positively, generally, around our different experiences. And there is a real current negative aspect which has been brought about not just through sport, but through that instant access to individuals through social media that is important in public life in a number of different areas. I guess picking up a couple of the words, and this is a little bit kind of forming in my head as I'm speaking, but a couple of the words that a number of different people have mentioned this evening, but to ask all of my panellists to respond to this. Talking about sport for a new generation, and I think Ian talked a lot about purpose. Tom spoke a lot about power, and various other people have spoken in similar terms without maybe not using those particular words. Are we in a moment now, in coming towards the end of 2021, where we think sport needs to change, or are we in a moment where we think sport can be a vehicle for change in whatever aspect of civic life and community life that might be? Maybe coming to people in reverse order this time, so maybe asking Tom first.
I guess despite the perhaps negativity I raised there, I would say I'm optimistic that sport can be a vehicle for change more than anything else, because and perhaps particularly because of more athlete activism, I would refer to it as, more and more, I think sport in general is realising the role it has to play in society. So, and perhaps more so than ever before. And I thought it was interesting even last week how many people within sport were talking about climate and starting conversations about sport's impact on our climate and asking questions like, how frequently does sport need to have fixtures which involve flying and travelling all over the world, and looking at things even that forensically. So I guess, sorry, just trying to sum up, I am optimistic that sport can be powerful for change, absolutely. And some of the things that we've heard about tonight and the things it can do for community and the things it can do for rehabilitation as well, particularly, it's extremely powerful, yes.
Mashkura.
I agree with what Ian was saying, and I think we saw quite a milestone for us in 2012, where we saw how sports Olympics really galvanized the country together. It was a really phenomenal moment for the whole sort of that period, and we saw that again this summer. So I absolutely think sports is one of those rare opportunities for us to come together as individuals, from diverse backgrounds, diverse interests, social economic backgrounds, and just come together. And again, there is that recreational enjoyment, there is that competitive element, but also a lot of really important issues around mental health, climate change, gender inequality are discussed through this medium. So I think I'm really optimistic for the future in terms of how it could be a real vehicle for change. Yeah.
Ian.
I'm pondering the question, and I think there's a few things. One is I find it's very difficult to talk about sport as a homogenous thing. I think right now you're seeing sport doing wonderful good things, and also sport doing incredibly kind of damaging things. And if you were looking at inequality, sport represents much of the inequality that we actually kind of like face in there. I think it has the possibility of doing good, and I think in terms of and I was really kind of like taken with I think Joan's kind of idea about the kind of the framing of it, and I think it's hard to say sport is good or sport is bad. It depends. And I think what's really important is that we don't just let sport, have its just carry on the way in which it's doing. I think there's a need for some form of intervention. There's a need for some form of way to say, how can we make it more likely to do good, more likely to kind of contribute to future generations, than actually damaging it. So I think if there's a kind of an intervention, if there's kind of some form of way of reducing the possibility of bad sport, I think it can be good. That's a there is genuine kind of thought.
Thanks, Ian. Hannah.
That was a follow on from that. Well, I agree. I think it absolutely is a vehicle for change, and I think we can't forget that sport isn't just about participation. It's about the parents taking the children to their sports sessions. It's about people watching sport on TV and having people that they aspire to, they look up to, and they kind of aspire to be how they are, and they see that on a regular basis, and it's thrown in our faces more than I think we necessarily think sometimes. I know I have lots of friends and family members that would say that they aren't interested in sports. Yet I know that I had family members that say that took me to take part in sport. So it is a vehicle for change. I do feel that, and I think there's lots of areas that it can kind of start creating that positive change. But it, like you said, it has to be the right change.
Yeah.
Joan.
Yeah, I guess this point about potential, I think we can raise the game and optimize sport. And I mean, at the level that I work, I'm talking about the experience of people doing sport, whether community, grassroots, all the way up to elite level. where are they coming from, what are the kind of environments that they're engaging in. And to give an example, we just completed a study just recently, just started the analyses, and we talked a lot about inclusion and how important it is, and the potential of sport to again bring people together. So what we did is we went, and most of the participants actually are from the West Midlands that played on teams that are multicultural. So whether it was team sports, football, rugby, cricket, etc. And we looked at the motivational dynamics and the motivational environment, and then we assessed things like, no matter who you are, have you experienced discrimination for who you are? And also your attitudes towards other people in terms of respect and exchanging and doing more than just running up and down the pitch with the ball, you know. And what we saw is those motivational dynamics predicted. So that to me is very empowering, those findings, because it's just, there is some basis. I mean, there's so many different levels, and I certainly agree with my colleagues in terms of where to intervene, but that's one place to go and try to make a difference, because then, you know, if you have those experiences in sport, you cross ethnic, racial boundaries, you learn respect, you do experience inclusion. Then the next thing is, does it carry over into the community? But at least it's a vehicle then for positive change.
Thanks, Joan. Right, bring this together in some form of meaningful conclusion then, but thank you very much first and foremost to everybody for joining us. I'm presuming it's millions of people online that have watched this evening. Thank you very much to our audience in person. I'll thank each of our speakers in just a moment, but I'm left with three thoughts. Firstly, picking up on something that I think Ian was saying, but certainly something that what Ian said triggered in my mind, was that something today that's come out as part of the racism in cricket story was an allegation that cricket is institutionally racist. Now, this has been an allegation that is often made of other institutions, and it's something that troubles me, because how can an institution be racist? People are racist. People are good or people are bad. So to accuse an institution or to accuse a whole sport of being racist is troubling, but I think it reflects the extent of which the problem is endemic in cricket in this particular instance. But I think it needs bringing back to the individuals, where we in the Jubilee Centre talk about character and character building of the individual for the benefit of society. I think we need in this instance to bring it back to the people, and it is, we are responsible for our own actions. We're responsible for being good or being bad, for winning or for losing, for competing fairly or competing unfairly. That's something that's stuck in my mind from most of the presentations this evening. Two further things to say. First and foremost, we're in Birmingham, and 2022, next summer, we're very proud to host the Commonwealth Games in this city, on campus at this university for some of the sports. Where I live in Sutton Coldfield, quite literally down the road from me, the triathlon will be taking place. So I'm very excited about this, and hopefully Birmingham can really represent itself in the best way possible. As Mashkura said, 2012 Olympic Games, and what that did for bringing the country together. The Commonwealth Games is not quite on the same level as the Olympics, but hopefully we have a real opportunity for Birmingham to showcase itself positively, and every different aspect of the city can be represented at the Commonwealth Games. I'll just leave you with one thing that myself, as a Newcastle fan, I'm particularly familiar with, and it is an accusation which is levelled at all different football teams, that fans want their teams to win. And they don't. Ultimately, we want our teams to try. So when we are consuming sport, whether that is watching elite level, football, rugby, cricket, Olympics, whatever it might be, whether we are parents or whether we are friends of people competing at amateur level, or whether we are competing ourselves and participating in sport, the most important thing is that we try. So Newcastle fans have a line which I think we unveiled this as a banner a few years ago, which is, we don't demand a team that wins, we demand a team that tries. And I think where we are trying and we are doing our best and we are doing it meaningfully and we are doing it positively, then sport and its uniqueness can be a vehicle for positive change. Thank you very much.